What's up, guys? We're going to break down Jalen Suggs' back injury, potential diagnoses, and his prognosis. My name is Dr. Marco Lopez, Doctor of Physical Therapy and Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, and co-founder of the Basketball Doctors. All right, guys, so let's break down this injury. It was a non-contact injury. As you can see, he's reaching out to go get the ball because his defender's going out. And as he's pushing off, he just falls to the ground and grabs his right side. And this is big key components because that's going to lead us to our potential diagnosis. Whenever you have any kind of non-contact and you grab onto one side, then you kind of have to zero in and focus your attention to what are the possible structures on that right side of low back pain. But let's break down what are some of our potential diagnoses from that injury. All right, guys, let's just jump into the 4 differential diagnoses. So the first one that we want to rule out that we think least likely of is a fracture. So as you can see the mechanism of injury, he really pushed off on the right side. It was non-contact and he reached to the opposite side. So there is potentially a fracture, but because he was putting his hand on one side, you can still have a fracture. You know that I have a fracture on a transverse process, but it's least likely because there was no contact injury. But every time there's some kind of traumatic back injury where you came out in a wheelchair, you always got to rule out a fracture. So they'll do an x-ray to try to rule out a fracture. Our next 3 diagnoses are kind of on our top 3, and it's kind of hard to really rule out each one, but we're gonna kind of do our best to see what we think it is. So the next one is a herniated disc. So whenever you had that rapid movement and he's slightly bending forward and then rotating right away, you always got to rule out a herniation disc. And with the herniated disc, it could happen on one side. So him holding on to that right side could really be indeed a herniated disc. But normally support, especially if it's unilateral, like a quick sharp pain going down their leg because they might be pushing on the nerve. Because he was just holding on to the right side, we think less likely of a herniated disc as opposed to the next 2 diagnoses. Our next potential diagnosis is a lumbar spine facet dysfunction. So the facet joint, it's kind of like any other kind of joint. It allows movement, but when it comes to the spine, it's right next in between each vertebrae, and it allows movement into flexion, extension, rotation. So whenever we have movements that have a rapid end range movement, so for him when he was pushing up, rotating fast, you might irritate the joint. And when it gets irritated, it's very painful and it's hard to get out of it. It kind of sometimes gets stuck. The reason why we say it potentially could be a facet dysfunction is because of where his hand was. Normally it's unilateral, so people have it on one side, and it's also most of the time when we have these rapid end range movements, or as you rotate really fast because you open and close those facets, those joints. And when you have your hand here, we're thinking more, oh, it possibly could be a facet. And like I mentioned, those are very painful when they get stuck and it's hard to get out of them. And sometimes you get some back spasms in there. Final potential diagnosis is the lumbar QL strain. So that's the muscle. So whenever a muscle gets strained, you either overstretch it or overdo it. For this instance, we're thinking more overstretching because as he pushes off, reaches out, you have that rapid separation because the QL muscle is from right around your hip towards your spine. And the way you overstretch it is when you do the opposite motion that it's supposed to do. Normally it does this. When you do the opposite and you do it fast, you overstretch that muscle. So when you overstretch that muscle right away, you're gonna go down and you're gonna grab onto that area because it's gonna hurt. Kind of like think about a hamstring. When you see the sprinter overstretch, they'll drop right away down and they'll grab into that muscle. Whenever that happens, your whole spine gets in shock and you don't want to move because that Q muscle is a big stabilizer there. So it's very hard to get up from a certain position. That's why he had to be escorted out in the wheelchair. So the big thing with these muscle strains is they normally happen when you have that rapid stretched out position. So for him, it's that rapid reaching out towards that ball. And when that happens, you probably will favor one side versus the other because it's mostly on one side, and for him it was his right side, and you saw him right away go down and grab onto that side. All right, guys, in regards to prognosis and recovery, so it was official after MRI. They said it was a lumbar strain with back spasms, and that's why it led to us with the QL muscle there. So whenever these injuries happen, one, you got to make sure you take your time with your rehab. A lot of the times you go back too soon and you'll re-strain that muscle. You'll still have those back spasms where you see a lot of athletes go back too soon, their back spasms up. So first of all, you need to let the pain calm down. From there, work the range of motion. You got to have full range of motion. From there, you got to be walking pain-free. From the walking, then you got to start doing some jumping, running, pain-free. Then you go into basketball aggressive activities. You want to avoid that excessive rotation, side bend, because that's going to be stretching out that muscle that's already strained. So he's going to limit that, but he's going to try to work those pain-free ranges of motion so he could regain that stability in the spine and avoid that, one, another strain, or two, those back spasms that would happen during the game. But that's kind of what we're thinking. If you guys have any questions regarding back pain or back injuries, or if you guys want us to cover any other athlete, comment below and we'll do our best to try to cover that athlete.